Morning, everybody. So, in this video, we're going to talk about truck specs and what you should be looking at. When you think about the type of truck you should have for the type of freight you're hauling. Now, I know a lot of guys want the ultimate truck. They want, for example, a big old Peterbilt 389 to haul dry van. you know, there's nothing wrong with that if you can afford the fuel mileage. I've seen owner operators, come to Crete, for example. They got a big Peterbilt, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's a matter of personal preference. I never tell guys they're right or wrong. I said, well, if that's what you prefer, that's your choice. But here's the thing to keep in mind. Um, with dry van, the rate, the pay is already kind of low compared to reefer and flatbed. And from my perspective, as a business person, not as a driver, but as a business person, um, your best opportunity to make profit is going to be on saving fuel, because fuel is your largest expense. When you track all your expenses and you're looking at your profit and loss statement for the month, and you could see, fuel is your, the biggest expense. It's a variable expense, which means that it fluctuates month to month to month. It's not like a truck payment. Truck payment's a fixed cost. You know what it's going to be every month. Fuel varies, because it depends on the terrain you're in, the time of year, the weight of the load you're hauling, things like that. So fuel price, fuel prices, and how much fuel you use varies from month to month to month. So, I titled this video, "When in Rome, do what the Romans do." So if you're with a big box carrier, look at what tractors they're using, and that's probably the tractor you should be looking at as a business person. You're not you're not making this decision based on a driver's perspective. Does a driver want to drive a 400 horsepower motor, or would they rather have a 500 horsepower motor? Well, a driver would rather have a 500 horsepower motor, but a business person would rather have the 400 horsepower motor. This is the idea: is that, are you a driver or are you a small business owner? You a lot of new owner operators view themselves as drivers, not as business people. I think the successful owner operators view themselves as business people. So they make business decisions. They don't make decisions based necessarily on the emotional attachment to trucks. It's like, yeah, everybody wants the glorious Peterbilt or Kenworth that gets 5 miles per gallon. But if you're hauling dry van, that's not going to do you any good. I mean, it's really going to lower your opportunities, because you won't have money for a lot of other things because you spend it all in the fuel tank. It's it. I mean, the trucks look great. I'm not going to argue with any driver who says they love their truck. I agree. The trucks are phenomenal, but are you a driver or are you a business person? If you're a business person, you look at that truck and you say, well, that, who cares about the looks? That truck only gets 5 miles per gallon. This truck over here gets 8 miles per gallon. When you're investing your own money, you think about how much profit you would like to make for the year. You take the truck that is best suited for the type of hauling you're going to be doing, not the truck that you picture in your mind that someday you would like to have. Doesn't mean you'll never have that truck. I think if you want a big Peterbilt or a big Kenworth, and you want to haul dry van, God bless you, whatever makes your heart pitter patter, but do it when you have the financial strength. Wait until you've got several years of experience as an owner operator, Wait until you got your debt paid off and your credit score above 800. Wait until you got an investment portfolio of at least $100,000. If you have all these things and you're in good health, it's like if you look at my video I created for the 5 keys to success, if you've achieved success and now you want to, drive a different truck that maybe is not the best truck for the type of freight you're hauling, but it's going to keep you motivated, then go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, I never tell an owner operator, I never tell another business owner their decision is right or wrong. If that's what you prefer to do, then, God bless you, go for it. But if you're first starting out, you want to start out on a good foot. You don't want to start out with, a piece of equipment that's not going to help you. You have a lot to learn when you're first starting out. So I would suggest, if you are with a big box carrier like I am with Crete, and you see what trucks they're using, a lot of times they sell their trucks, to their drivers to become owner operators. That's probably the perfect spec for that type of freight. Because these big box carriers, they try to save costs, every little nickel and dime that they can. So if they could, get a truck, spec it out to maximize the fuel savings, then that's what they're going to do. Because you got 7,000 trucks. If you get even a half a gallon, mile per gallon improvement per truck, that's a lot of money. So these trucking companies spec their trucks very, very tightly for the type of freight that they're hauling. So if you're first starting out, that's probably the best truck for you. When you look at, when you're trying to match up what truck is best for the type of freight you're hauling, it's probably the same truck that the company you're leased on with. Look at what they're using. At Crete, they're using Cascadias and they're using Kenworth T680s. No Peterbilts. I don't know why, but they don't use Peterbilts. None of the big motors. So you got to think about, what can you do as a business owner to ensure your survival and your success. If you go out and you buy the wrong truck, you're already setting yourself up to fail. It sounds great. I think as company drivers, you imagine the day that you finally be able to afford to buy a truck. And I mean, guys think about this for years. And they have in their mind the picture, okay, if I'm going to buy a truck, this is the truck I'm going to buy. And then it's not the right truck for the type of freight that they're hauling. They've already made their first mistake as a brand new owner operator. They purchased the wrong truck. It's like, well, there's nothing appealing about that Freightliner. I agree. You're not going to get any argument from me. It's not exactly a work of art. It doesn't, it's not necessarily something you would show off to your buddies or your family and say, hey, look at this truck I'm driving, but it may be the best truck for you, because it's spec'd right for the type of freight you're hauling. And then the other thing with when in Rome, do what the Romans do, all the shop mechanics, they're trained on that type of truck. So if you bring in a big Peterbilt into Crete, the mechanics won't touch it because they don't have the training on it. They don't have the parts. They'll tell you to go to Peterbilt. They'll work on a Kenworth because they work on a Kenworth T680, and they'll work on any Freightliner because they're trained on Freightliner. But you bring in a Volvo, they don't have any training on Volvos. They probably won't touch it. So you get a discount labor rate from the company that you're leased on with in most cases. And if you have the same equipment that their mechanics are trained on, then not a problem. You bring in an odd piece of equipment, you're going to go to the dealership and you're going to pay much higher rate for hourly repair at the dealership. Dealership could be $200 an hour. The guys at the terminal might only charge less than $100 an hour. So these are things that new owner operators don't think about. They they have a lot of misconceptions about what it is to be an owner operator. Um, they bring a mindset of truck driver. They're they want their dream truck. It's like, okay, well, you need to change from the mindset of being an employee to being the business owner. And the business owner says you're going to take the truck that's going to make you the most money, not the truck that you want. you know, you want that truck, wait. Just be patient. Wait 5 years, wait 10 years, then decide if you still want that truck. You may not. You may realize over the years that as your business experience develops, that your mindset changes from being a driver to being a business owner. It's like, well, I'm focused on cost per mile. I'm focused on how much money I can save each month. A new owner operator is focused on, the fantasy truck. It's like, well, you have to change your perspective here a little bit, because now you're running a business. I think company drivers who think about becoming owner operators, they see they can fall in this trap of seeing it as, well, that's just another trucking job. Owner operator, is like being a company driver. Well, no, not really. It's the difference between being an employee and being a business owner. If you're the owner, has a whole different mindset than if you're the employee. See, the company drivers, they're employees. Owner operators, they're business owners. So truck purchase comes down to business decisions. And you purchased the wrong truck from the beginning, you've already made your first bad business decision. That's why I say when in Rome, do what the Romans do. That's the safe way to go. If you got money saved up and you got experience and you want to go buy, your fantasy truck, then there's nothing wrong with that. You got the deep pockets and you know what you're doing. That's fine. But realize that the optimal piece of equipment to maximize profits is probably the truck that's been spec'd up by the company. And you're either going to make a business decision or you're going to make a decision based on what you would prefer to drive as a driver. And I would suggest, if you're first starting out, make wise business decisions. Don't let emotion control you in purchasing your truck. Just get a good piece of equipment that's going to get you off on a good start. Make sure it has a warranty. Don't ever buy a truck without a warranty. You want that warranty. And as you get to your second or third truck, you want to reach for a truck that you really want to drive. That's perfectly okay. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.